And then that didn't really work because of some internal things at Warner Brothers. So then we had our own show on Max, and then we got sold to Netflix. But it does feel like
So my first question is for Steve. So this series, Deadwood Detectives, is based on a comic series written by Neil Gaiman and Matt Wagner, right? So how did the opportunity to adapt them come to you, and what made you hop on this boat?
I've been a big fan of this comic book. I read Sandman when I was in high school. I discovered the Dead Boy Detectives comic book when I was going through a period of loss in my life, and it actually was soothing to me in a weird way, in a weird psychedelic way. And so I've always been in love with the comic, but I first realized, oh, maybe this is something I could adapt when I was first working on The Flight Attendant at Warner Brothers, and I was feeling kind of pretty cocky. So I went to DC and I was like, can I please adapt this small little property that you probably don't care about? And they said no. And I cried. And then there was like a changing of the guard at DC. There was some turnover, and I kind of snuck in the middle of that and was like, I'm going to try again. Can I please have this property? And somehow the request got all the way to Jim Lee and Neil Gaiman, and they said yes. And so I took it and ran with it.
That's great. It's actually a great story. Congrats on that. And Beth, when you adapt something like a comic in this case, you probably have to make a lot of adjustments to put it into the screen. So what was the most, did you have to leave anything out, like anything you considered important for the sake of this show? And what was the biggest change you had to make from the comics to the screen?
Steve has, the boys are older than they are in the comic, and we wanted to make a little more adult content. So we had to age them up. So that was probably the biggest change, but also we sort of have the freedom to, we're living in this world that Neil created, and but we're also free to make up our own characters, and we have kind of our own structure to how the series is that I think complements the essence and the heart of the IP.
So I heard, Steve, that this show, this series, and this idea in general came up a long way before coming to Netflix. So what was the most challenging thing you had to do as a showrunner to make this happen?
I mean, it's really interesting because we did hit some hurdles, but they aren't bad stories because each hurdle sort of put the show in a better place than it was before. And so initially we were sort of going to be a spinoff of Doom Patrol, and I wrote an episode of Doom Patrol that introduced the boys, and Jeremy Carver, who is the showrunner of Doom Patrol, was very kind and kind of invited us in, and he's an EP on our series. And then that didn't really work because of some internal things at Warner Brothers. So then we had our own show on Max, and then we got sold to Netflix. But it does feel like everyone involved at each step was so incredibly supportive of what we wanted to do that it just kept getting better each time we moved. So at a certain point, I was like, okay, well, whatever has to happen is going to happen, but eventually this is going to make it to air. And I think we're very excited that after so many years, we're finally getting to show it to people and talk about it. So yeah, I feel good.
Beth, as a showrunner, what's the first thing you do when you embark in a project like this? And what's your favorite thing about being in this project?
Ooh, those are great questions. As a showrunner, I get into the room, and that's for me like the most fun part, and get to see what all the writers come up with. And so the first couple of weeks of the writers' room, we let our writers kind of run free with wild and crazy ideas that may never be on the show. Most rooms I've been in, we do that, and you probably use 2 or 3 of those ideas. But on this show, we use all of them. So that's basically just sort of is part of the show being so crazy and free and creative, is one of my favorite parts of being on the show, because I've never worked on a show where you have those kind of like, you can literally do anything, as you've seen on the series.
It's great. Actually, it's great for you guys to have such a creative freedom. And I think that's something that, mainstream has allowed creators to do. If you had to describe the movie using 3 emojis, Steve, what would you use?
I would use the skull and crossbones emoji. I would use the winky face emoji, and I would use the spyglass emoji.
And what would your 3 emojis be, Beth?
Oh, no, well, definitely the skull, and then I would use a purple heart for the color scheme of our show, and for all the romances, and I would use a crown for the cat.
Finally, I would really like to know what's your favorite episode out of all 8 of them, both of you.
7.
You're gonna say 7. Oh, that's so hard. I really like 4 because I love the ending of 4. It's one of my favorite endings of any episode.
With that montage,
Mhm.
it's really good.
I love that ending.
We really hope that you'll watch Dead Boy Detectives.
Yes.